Well, Swami has certainly given us a great story to work with here this morning. I heard Nitai say one time that he thought this story was one of the best stories in the history of the human race. He's the founder of the Living Wisdom School, so he has told hundreds of stories, thousands of times. But at the time of our story, Master is still fairly young. He's about 17, and he has finished his high school and spent some time in one ashram. And he has a break now because he's left that ashram. And he's headed eventually to the ashram of his newly found guru, but he can't go there quite yet. So he has this short break before he can join Sri Yukteswar. And Master just had arrived in the city of Agra with his friend Jitendra. And Jitendra and Master had joined that ashram together, and they left together, so they put their heads together to see what they could come up with to use this time in between. And they decided they would go and see the Taj Mahal, which they had heard so much about, but neither one of them had seen. And it just so happened that Yogananda's brother lived in Agra, so they were going to go there and stay with him. Now, Ananta is Mukunda's older brother. Mukunda is Paramhansa Yogananda's birth name, his boyhood name. And he's still fairly young also. He's about 26, maybe 27 when this takes place. And he's the eldest of the siblings. And this comes with a certain responsibility and position and status in Indian culture. And this is a position that Ananta takes very seriously and that he takes a good deal of pride in as well. And in this single-parent family, he has taken it upon himself to play a parental role often, and especially with his younger brothers, one not always completely welcome. So Ananta right now is, he's just been transferred his job from Calcutta to Agra. He got a promotion with this, and he is now in management of the BNR Railway, a very prestigious position, especially for such a young man, and he makes a very large salary for someone his age and probably has a beautiful home in Agra. And he's also quite pleased with the way he's doing, how well he's doing. So Mukunda, on the other hand, has not been heeding his father's recommendations that he go ahead with his education and that he take his studies more seriously. He's been staying at this one ashram, now he's going to go to another ashram, and he's following neither a formal course of education nor is he pursuing a career as is expected in his family. Now, we may understand the appropriateness of Paramhansa Yogananda going off and spending years in an ashram, but we have the advantage of hindsight, about a century of hindsight to see what happened with his life. But as far as Ananta is concerned, this is just his younger brother goofing around and being irresponsible, refusing to take his responsibility in the family and get a responsible position. And he's just living off of his father's good graces through a small stipend and living off of the donations that other people are supporting these ashrams with. Now, one of the reasons this story is so very powerful is that it focuses on one of the greatest challenges that we have as devotees. And that is, are we going to trust in this material world and spend our time and our resources building up more resources? Or are we going to spend our time and our energy for something higher? Is that going to be our first thought, our first approach? I mean, after all, why shouldn't we perceive what we get through the senses? That's what we've been trained to do. That's what we're taught to do in school. That's how we're supposed to make decisions. But of course, down through history, great religions and saints and sages have had another idea also, that there is something, if invisible, that is real, and that we should also be turning our attention to that. Well, Ananta gives Mukunda an elder brother sermon, and it's got great dialogue. Ananta says, "It would serve you right if father disinherited you, Mukunda. How foolishly you are throwing away your life." "Well, you know, Ananta, I seek my inheritance from the Heavenly Father. Money first. God can always come later on in life. Who knows? Life may be too long." Meaning, if you don't make enough when you're young and save it up, sock it away, you may live so long that you're going to run out. And some of us that have had to make or are about to make Social Security decisions about when to begin, that may be able to relate to Ananta's point of view. But Mukunda responds, "God first, for money is his slave. And who can tell, life may be too short, and we won't be able to find God." Well, Ananta says to him that it looks like Mukunda is already returning to the family nest for sustenance, because here he is, he's come to Agra, and he's asked to live and stay with him. But Ananta is hospitable, and he helps Mukunda and his friend Jitendra to settle in for the evening, playing the good host. But the next morning, at an early breakfast, Ananta has a scheme in mind, and he asks Mukunda, "So you feel quite independent of father's wealth?" And Mukunda says, "I am conscious of my dependence on God. Words are cheap. Life has shielded you thus far. What a plight if you were forced to look to the invisible hand for your food and shelter, instead of looking to Father and I. Soon you would be begging in the streets." "Never," Mukunda says. "I would not put faith in passers-by rather than God. He can devise 1,000 resources better than the begging bowl." "I say this is just rhetoric. Suppose I suggest that we put this vaunted philosophy of yours to the test in the real, tangible world." "I would agree," Mukunda says. A master sets the attitudinal example for all of us. A test, a challenging situation. I agree. I welcome this test. God, you and I will have a great time getting through this together. Don't you just hear yourself saying that again and again? Well, he sets the example for us. Then Mukunda and Jitendra go on to have this incredible adventure, which most of you in this room have no doubt read in AY. And it's so perfectly, so point on for today's reading. And of course, Swami gave us the tail end of the tale, but just kind of teasing us like, okay, let's hear the whole story. So after breakfast, Ananta describes this test that he has devised, his challenge. There, go to Brindaban, and that's a city about 45 miles away, distant enough to make it uncomfortable for you to be stranded there. But Brindaban is filled with sights of Krishna's babyhood and his childhood. So going to Brindaban is kind of like going, for a Christian to go to Bethlehem and Nazareth, filled with many holy sites. And so it's a good destination. I kind of ask myself, why did Ananta choose that? And I think it was because Ananta was convinced that they were going to have a miserable time. And they would be more miserable if they were in a place where they could have had a fantastic time, if they had only had money, if they'd only had the resources that he knows they won't have. So without the money to pay for guides and transportation and food, they'll be most miserable there. So he puts a number of restrictions on them to try to prove to Mukunda that he cannot get along without what he, Ananta, and his father have been providing him with in his life so far. So they cannot take a single rupee. They cannot beg or ask for food. They cannot mention to anyone the circumstance that they're in, or that they're involved with some kind of a test or some kind of experiment. They must not miss any meals, and they need to be good meals. And they have to see all of the sights and be guided and shown everything there in Brindaban. And at the end, they cannot be stranded there. He's going to give them one-way tickets, enough to get them into trouble, but only one way. And they have to be back at his house by midnight. In other words, they need to have an experience in Vrindavan just the same as though they had gone laden with funds and resources. That's what he's asking Mukunda to prove. If God can provide for him as well as his family, okay, then let's see it. Well, Mukunda immediately reaffirms his acceptance of the challenge, and so Ananta says, okay, I'll take you to the train right now. Not going to give him a chance to change his mind. Well, Jitendra there, he's just standing there with his mouth open in response to what Mukunda has agreed to. I mean, they've come here to have this great time in Agra, to see this most sublime of all architecture, and to be nicely ensconced with a wealthy brother. But now instead he finds himself heading off to Vrindavan to some perilous adventure, the circumstances of which will certainly end in disaster. And this may be the point where we find ourselves in the story. Probably Jitendra is where we can most easily find ourselves, the role we might be playing, and probably the role we play much of the time in our everyday lives. Oh my God, here I am minding my own business, doing what I thought was right. How did this happen to me? How did I get myself into these circumstances? Who got me into this mess? He knows who to blame, of course, in this case. Well, once at the station, Ananta pats them down, or somehow is assured that they're not sneaking a hoard onto the train with them, a hoard of food or money. And he gives them the two-way tickets to Vrindavan. But then it really hits Jitendra of the mess that he's getting himself into. And he is very dismayed and says, oh, Ananta, please, just give me 1 or 2 rupees. In case we get into really bad trouble, I can telegraph you. But Mukunda, of course, Jitendra, I will not proceed with this test if you have any kind of final financial security. So Jitendra concedes, and they board the train. Now here's an interesting point to this story. Mukunda in no way initiated this test. He in no way set this up so he could prove or show what he could do. And this is a thing that is not altogether uncommon for spiritual seekers, devotees. We get a little realization, we get a little power, and it's like, oh, I can do that. Yeah, let me show you. Here, I can handle that. I know that's beyond most people, but I think that I can do that. Here, let me show you. But not so. That's always a trap, of course. But not so with Mukunda. Mukunda is simply responding to his brother's ridicule of his beliefs and him challenging whether or not his trust in God is real. So things go along pretty well. They are in the train for several miles. They travel in silence. But eventually Jitendra begins to, well, he gets a little queasy. He gets a little doubtful, and he finds this situation that he's getting deeper and deeper into just very concerning, especially when he thinks about the fact that there's a whole day in front of them, and he hasn't seen any food yet. He says to Mukunda, I see no sign that God is going to supply our next meal. Be quiet, doubting Thomas, he says back to him. Could you arrange that he hurry it up, please? I am famished. And when I considered that prospect of being without food all day long, well, I came here with you to view the tomb at the Taj Mahal, not to be interred into my own. So here we are again. Even if we set off willingly on the course that Divine Mother has laid out for us, how often, as soon as the first challenge comes or the doubtful situation arises, we begin to amplify that doubt. And especially the prospect of a problem, even though we haven't encountered it yet, but something that could happen down the road. No food for dinner either. Oh my goodness. Begins to make us more concerned than we really need to be at that point in time. Well, while Jitendra is suffering at the thought of no food for the rest of the day, the door of their compartment opens and two gentlemen come in and sit themselves down across from them. And they greet the boys, and then one of them says, "Young lads, do you have friends in Brindaban?" Oh, well, what would be your response? "Oh, great, Divine Mother's taking care of us. Okay, let's see, how can I work to make this out? Help Divine Mother to make this work for us and get us out of our trouble. But Mukunda, none of your business." And he turns his gaze rudely aside from the people across from him. But the stranger is not rebuffed. And he says, "I think that I should make sure that you have food today, and perhaps some shelter from this overpowering heat too." But Mukunda, "No, sir, please, let us alone." He's going to make Divine Mother come through for him, just in spite of himself. Now you can imagine Jitendra sitting there beside him, just fuming. So there's no more conversation on the train ride. It's just a couple more stops till Brindaban. And when the two boys get out, they detrain and they're out on the platform. These two chance companions of theirs each grab one of them by the arm and walk them over to the road and won't let go. They insist that they're going with them. And there's a horse cab there waiting for them, so they get in the horse cab and off they go. Well, we're about to find out here another aspect of being God's partner and putting him first. God has a much bigger imagination than we do, even for our own lives. And so when we are able to do our part of the trusting and the prioritizing, God can then bring us experiences that we hadn't even dreamed of. So they're in the horse cab, and they drive up and down this long driveway, and what appears is a stately hermitage with huge grounds, well kept for, evergreen trees. And they are shown right into the parlor where they're greeted by the ashram hostess, who is refined and serene, and she welcomes them. And one of the companions says to her, "Ma, at the last moment, the princes that we were supposed to meet could not come. They send their regrets. But we have brought these two guests, who we are sure are devotees of Lord Krishna." Well, the hostess says to the boys, "You could not have come on a better day. I was expecting two royal patrons of this hermitage. What a shame if all of my cooking had found none to appreciate it." Well, these unexpected words have a disastrous effect on Jitendra. He just bursts into tears right there, regretting his lack of faith. And Master makes a little comment later that the hostess didn't seem disturbed by his bursting into tears. Perhaps she was used to adolescent quirks, she says. So they're led out to the dining patio that's spicy with savory odors in the air. And then the hostess retreats back into the kitchen. But Mukunda had been waiting for this point. Oh, I think I left out of the story that on the train, when he wasn't being sympathetic to Jitendra, Jitendra had reached over and pinched him in what Master said was an inconvenient spot. So he was been waiting for the two of them to get along. So at this point, Mukunda pinches Jitendra back and says, "See, doubting Thomas, the Lord does work, and in a hurry too." It's something that we don't always think about Master, but as a boy, well, in writing the autobiography, he did not wear his spirituality, his power, on his sleeve. You know, he, as a kid, he played sports, he rode his motorcycle. You know, from just the outside, if you didn't know him, you wouldn't understand. And I think this little pinching episode back and forth shows the same thing. He lived it, but He was not ostentatious about who he really was. Well, lunch is announced, and they are served a sumptuous feast. Ashram disciples are passing back and forth, laden with dishes, serving them. And it turns out that they are served some 30 courses for this meal. They even bring in a fan, one of those fans, and have it fanned because of the heat that they are in. And later, Yogananda remarked, since arriving on this planet, Jitendra and I had never tasted such delicacies. Well, silenced as they were by Ananta's requirement, they could not explain to the gracious lady that their thanks held a double significance. They got more than just a fantastic meal. And then they leave the hermitage, and they find the heat outdoors really merciless and oppressive. So they make for the shelter of a large shade tree. But before too long, there were sharp words being uttered again. And here is Jitendra at it again. A fine mess you got me into. That lunch was just an accidental good fortune. How can we see the sights of this wonderful city now? We're stuck here in the heat with no money. And how on earth are you going to get me back to Ananta's? Almost instantly, a young man comes up to them and says, dear friends, you must be strangers here. Permit me to be your host and your guide today. Well, Jitendra's face blanches as he realizes once again he's blown it and he's lost his faith. Yeah, so maybe we show up again here in the guise of Jitendra, even though Master Divine Mother comes through for us and we're the next day, later that day, our doubts surface again. We're uncertain, we're unclear. Well, the young man offers to take them around, but Mukunda, just as on the train, declines the offer and says, no, we're fine, go away. But the young man says, surely you are not banishing me. You cannot be. During my midday devotions, Lord Krishna came to me in a vision, and he showed me two fugitive figures under this very tree and bade me come here. So you cannot turn me away. What joy I would have if you would just accept my humble services. So the young man has a horse carriage ready to go. And they spend the whole day visiting temples and visiting shrines that are dedicated to Lord Krishna, all the way into the evening. And as evening comes on, they do head to the train station, approach it, and their new friend, as they're about to the station, excuses himself and runs off. And when he eventually returns, he is loaded down with sweetmeats and treats and begs the boys to take them with them on their journey home, and also asks them to bless him by receiving this big roll of rupee notes that he hands to them, and 2 tickets just purchased for Agra, and gives them to him. Well, with midnight approaching, the 2 Cinderellas that were sent forth penniless enter Ananta's bedroom, and his face is indeed a study in astonishment. And then silently, Mukunda showers the table with rupees. Well, there's a little tension at first, of course. And finally, Ananta relaxes and capitulates and says laughingly, Jitendra, tell me the truth. Did my young brother stage a holdup? Which brings us story to the point where we had it in the readings this morning, where Ananta turns sober and amazingly asks Mukunda to initiate him. Well, the story is just rich with inspiration for us. It demonstrates the power of having a strong faith in God, having that faith that God is actually in charge and will take care of us, contrary to nearly everything that we have learned and that we hear around us. We can see that power in the story. And we need to remember this didn't happen because Mukunda was an avatar. This only happened because he had faith. He knew that this was going to happen. This is not something special for him. This is available to all of us. And it shows us how much easier it is for God to provide for us if we will put our first thought toward the higher Dharma and then follow through. Because when we are actually working with God, we are also working in our own best interests. And it's much easier for him to help us if we're actually on board with him. The story also gives us this example that when a challenge rears its ugly head in the middle of our day, that right then we can welcome it. We can just let go. We can be ready for it and have that be our knee-jerk response. Okay, great. Let's get on with it. Not in an egotistical way, but eagerly and with faith, or at least affirming our faith. And we see here that when the timing of a solution is not what we'd hoped for, or the first opportunity for relief doesn't work out, that we are to maintain our confidence in Divine Mother, knowing that in time, her love and her care will win out for us, even in the real world. Most of us can still continue developing that trust and that faith to take it to a higher level. But we need to listen to the experiences of others. It's very important. That's where this story comes in. We have this experience that we can make a part of our base, because to have a strong faith, Swami Kriyananda said that faith is born of experience. Belief can be learned, can be heard. We can believe with our mind, but faith is something that is an entire person is experience. Big events, big crises, major decisions are extremely important times for us to put God first. But we have even more frequently the opportunity in small decisions to put God first. And so that's where we should be working all the time, every day, even very little things, what we read, what we watch, what we listen to, what we put into our bodies, how we spend our time, who we decide to spend our time with, putting God first. And each of those little decisions can begin to build us a base, a foundation for our faith, as we see how successful that is in terms of the results that Divine Mother is able to give to us. But we really have to start spreading our wings and not always choose what brings us the most resources or choose what's the most comfortable for us. We need to get out there on the skinny branches, begin trusting Divine Mother that we are not going to fall. And then we'll be able to take advantage of that faith when it's more sorely tested, if that foundation is strong and true. Our teachings give us all kinds of instructions and techniques to gain this base of experience. All we have to do is commit ourselves to using them, and then they can work through us. But in light of all this whole idea of this morning's reading and this story, it's very important to remember this. God loves us, even if we do not put first things first. God loves us and cares for us. And that love in no way diminishes. Now, we may be so much in the way that we cannot get as many goodies, or we won't see the same level of successes, but it makes no difference to God whether we blow it or not. God still loves us. But how much more satisfying and rewarding to partner with God and put first things first, moving ahead, hand in hand, and having shared adventures together with Divine Mother.